I was rotating in a rural country hospital. During the day, it busted with activity as patients came and went, but at night, the halls were eerily quiet. I was on sites with a family emergency physician, and we were responsible for taking care of the entire hospital while on shift. Typically, we only had around one patient an hour, so on a slow night, the nurse told me to go to sleep in a patient bed on the top floor of the hospital, which was, at the time, in a dilapidated state and not being used for patients. So I made my way up to the top floor, and the musty smell of neglect and disuse hanged heavy in the air. The floors creaked beneath my feet, and the paint was peeling in places, but I didn't think anything of it, as I found an empty room overlooking the small city park. The gentle snowflakes falling outside my window and the halogen lights cutting through the thick snow-covered darkness lulled me into a sense of calm, and I tucked myself into bed. The room was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat and the sound of the snow falling outside. I fell asleep and woke up about a half hour later. I felt colder than before and groggily stumbled out of bed towards what appeared to be an old-school heater next to the window. I found the small dial on the side of the heater and turned it. Click, click, click. Only I didn't turn it a third time. The third click was a soft click on the glass window. I felt a chill run down my spine as I heard the clicking sound coming from outside of the window. I had forgotten just how dark and silent this small rural town could be at night. As I peered out of the window, all I saw were shadows moving in between the trees and bushes that filled the park below me. Then all of a sudden, I could see two yellow eyes staring back at me with a glint in them. I quickly turned away from what was sure to have been my imagination playing tricks on me. But something inside me told me it wasn't so. The click seemed too deliberate for it to be anything natural, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. As I stepped away from the window and tried to talk myself down, this could be anything. It's probably just an animal or some kids playing around in the snow. But then suddenly, a bright light lit up right below the window. There stood a figure silhouetted against by its own eerie glow. My whole body felt like it had been drained. My whole body was paralyzed. After struggling to move for a few seconds, which seems like an eternity, I gathered in a sudden burst of power to move and rushed back to the bed. I climbed and moved all the way in the corner with my back towards the wall and eyes fixed on the window. There was no more dark figure to be seen. My heart was beating rapidly against my chest now, and I was trembling while I kept staring at the window for the next few minutes, trying to process what I just saw. Was it an animal? A person? Whatever it was, it definitely didn't belong here. Not at this time of night anyhow. While the figure was gone now, I still felt someone was watching over me from across the room. I sat there, frozen for what felt like all of time. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I spun around only to see the ER nurse poke her head in through the door to let me know we had a patient in the ER I needed to see. Gathering some courage, I got off the bed and followed her. I never discussed this with anyone at the hospital, never saw the dark figure again, and I hope I never do. For a period of about a year, my mother worked at a long-term care facility for senior citizens. She took the overnight shift, doing a lot of laundry during the sleeping hours and catching up on the patient notes and attending to any room alarms, then helping residents with dressing and grooming in the AM. There was a female patient, we'll call her Mary, who was the oldest person on the floor. She was a centurion at the age of 102. She couldn't walk, and as to be expected, required assistance to stand and dress and to go to the toilet. But she had a sharp mind and regularly amused the staff and visitors with her snappy comebacks and wry observations, often peppered with bits of sage wisdom gathered over the course of a century of life. She wasn't what one would consider to be a dementia sufferer, not even in the earlier stages. To put it in my mother's words, Mary was still with it. Which is what makes this little occurrence all the more unnerving. One night, my mother is working with another nurse. The residents are all in bed. The floor is dark. The floor was laid out with a central nursing hub and 3 offshoot hallways lined on both sides with residents' rooms. The other nurse was at the end of one of these hallways folding and putting away laundry into a cabinet. At the hub, my mother was working on notes when the light-up switchboard for the room call buttons flashed a single red light. Then it went off. That was weird because, as my mother told me, the lights weren't supposed to go out without a nurse entering the room and switching it off on the wall, which is certainly out of the bedridden resident's reach. Shrugging it off as a possible malfunction in the room button, my mother rose and walked to the room in question, which happened to be Mary's room. Just as she's about to push open the door, she hears a clear but soft-spoken lady's voice saying, "Mary?" My mom says it sounded like someone was right behind her, as clear as day. Thinking it was the other nurse, my mom turned, but nobody. She could see the nurse still busy with laundry straight down the opposite hallway. Now, my mom was a bit jumpy from this and did a quick look around, trying to find who said Mary's name. Nobody. Not another body walking around. Shaking her head and thinking she must be hearing things or a resident had their TV on or something, she pushes open Mary's door. Mary is awake and, hearing the door, raises her head and a hopeful voice says, "Mama?" My mom says this jarred her a bit because Mary hadn't shown any signs of confusion before, always recognizing where she was and who she was around. But my mom said no, it was just her, the nurse, and did she need something? Mary looked sad but shook her head no. My mother arranged the blankets and left the room, returning to the hub. When morning came, she began her rounds, and when she opened Mary's door, expecting some sarcastic comment about how long she took to get there, there was only silence. Mary had passed away. My mother has said that it is common for the elderly to revert to an almost childlike state right before their death. Many call out for their mother. Maybe Mary's mom answered. The eerie feeling of that night stayed with my mother for quite a long time. The strange voice calling Mary's name and the sudden malfunction of the switchboard, it all seemed too coincidental. Whatever the case may be, the memory of that night would stay with her forever. I work on an adult oncology unit where the harsh reality of death is a constant companion. The majority of our patients are comfort care, living out their final days in the hospital. The air is heavy with the weight of impending loss, and the halls echo with the soft sobs of loved ones saying their goodbyes. We have the most deaths in the hospital on our unit, and many floats avoid working on our floor due to the high number of fatalities. But for us, it's different. We form deep connections with our patients, and the love and care we provide is a source of comfort in their final days. As we navigate the ebb and flow of life and death on our unit, we've noticed a strange pattern. It seems that death comes in threes. For weeks, there will be no fatalities. Everyone successfully makes it out of there to home or a hospice and will breathe a sigh of relief. But then, without warning, we'll have a week or two where we see a steady stream of patients passing away. Always 3 or 6 deaths in a week, usually few minutes or hours apart from each other. A few months back, It was a particularly difficult week for the staff on the floor, as we lost two of our beloved patients in one night. One of them, a dear old lady, had been a resident of room 8 for an extended period. We had grown attached to her, watching as she slowly declined. Her once spry body was wasting away before our eyes. Her passing was a hard blow for everyone on the floor. She passed on at night, and by the next day, there was a new patient in her room. It's hard on us, but as we all know, patients come and go, and we have to move on. I was doing the admission with a new patient and going over room orientation stuff. I explained that she had a one-stop shop remote which controlled the lights, TV, radio, and had the call light. Right as I finished explaining to her that the TV buttons are right here, I placed the remote back on the holder on the wall next to her bed, and instantly the TV turned on, by itself. It began flipping through each channel at an alarming rate, faster than if you were to just hold down the channel up button. The new patient, a little older and thankfully was not observant, and thought I was doing it, but no one was touching the remote. She said, "No, thank you. I don't want to watch the TV right now." So I reached down to the remote and tried to turn it off, but it wouldn't turn off. I ended up panicking a bit inside and yanked the remote out of the wall and told her that it seemed to not be working properly and that I would get her a new one. The TV still wouldn't turn off even after I unplugged the remote from the wall, and normally it would all be connected and not work if it wasn't plugged in properly. I ended up having to walk and manually shut the TV off. I headed out of there, telling her I'd be right back, and as I went to the nurse's desk to grab another one, I ran into another nurse. She was also grabbing another remote, which was odd. We just got a new shipment in, and they all were normally working properly. We rarely had to replace them anymore. I asked her if her remote was broken too, and she said that hers was acting up. I asked her which room she was in, and it was another room that a patient had passed in the night before also. The TV remotes were uncharacteristically acting up from across the wing at the same time in the same rooms that people had died the night before. It was as if the spirits of the deceased were still lingering, and their presence was affecting the electronics in the room. The eerie atmosphere on the floor was now tinged with a sense of the supernatural, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I couldn't help but wonder if the ghostly figures of the patients who had passed away were still present, trying to communicate with us in their own sort of way. The thought sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I walked down the corridors of the hospital.